Giving us very nice.
Sentence that says.
What do you call it? Foliage. There you go, bad foliage. All right, so we have the 1 o'clock docket and is what it is. And there's 2 items. We have 2 items, and one dealing with retired Judge Moriarty contacted Dr. John Groovy and contacted myself and I think Director Schultz and had some questions about foster care, which we'll get to in just a bit. But Jessica Din Glenning had some, I think, very appropriate suggestions. The Forms Committee met, and if you'll pull out the sentencing, the PSI in regards to special rules 32, 33, and 26. Jessica suggested that we clarify those rules and make them more applicable to the statutes that they represent. And so you'll see those corrections on 32 on page 6 of the PSI on special rule 32, 33, and 26. Scott, anything you'd like to add?
I'm sorry, Judge. Is this in our packets?
It is.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's behind the foster care.
It's the very last document, the pre-sentence investigation.
So the only, I guess the only comment that I would have would be the had an old student law school that would always say, don't think great thoughts, just read the statute. And in this particular situation, we are not substantively changing anything with regard to these particular special rules. It's simply actually clarifying some of the language. Jessica had brought up some issues that had taken place just as part of her practice that clarifying these particular items would assist in when you're in court, you have these things and it actually goes into a little bit more detail. It essentially models the statute itself. And then as far as the special rule 27, the third and subsequent felony drug possession, we have questions from time to time about this as well, that the statute does not cover out-of-state convictions, priors. It's specific to Kansas statutes, and so that is the clarifying language. In addition to this, we did not include it, but as you know, the special rule supplemental page is in the journal entry as well. And so this would actually be applicable, similar language that would be carried over to the journal entry as well.
Jessica, anything you'd like to add?
No, I just we aren't substantively changing anything. It is just making the language tied closer to the statute because the shorthand that was listed in the special rules didn't account for some of the variability. And then there was litigation over does the special rule apply because people were going off the special rules page and not reading the statutes. So
Any discussion? If not, I would entertain a motion. Okay, Jessica. Jessica D.
I hate taking this stuff up when I haven't had a chance to even look at anything. So I'll just abstain from the vote and we can move on. Because I wanna look at this and I don't know that it's fine.
We can certainly table this to the next meeting, our next meeting in November, right? Yeah, we could table this to the next meeting in November.
This is the first time I'm seeing it and I want to make sure that I also have a chance to look at the stuff that's behind it. It's not that I have a problem with it per se, but it's a rather, I think, it's a decision I would at least like time to look at the statutes on.
So if everybody's in agreement, we'll just table this till November. Does that work?
yeah, fair enough.
All right. So
Thank
that's what we'll
you.
do.
We're agreeable.
So we'll put that on the November docket. The other part of this is in regards to the request by retired Judge Kevin Moriarty. He, I think, is still very active in the foster care and the child needed care proceeding. And he was wanting to know if there was a way that we could add questions to the PSI to determine And those questions are contained in the handout. And they're listed on the PSI that you have, only they're marked out in regards to whether or not were you involved in a child welfare system, were you placed in foster care, how old were you at the time of removal, removal occurred more than 1 year, were you placed with a family member? All this information to then be used to determine whether or not we need to tweak our foster care system. What is the data in regards to how much we're harming children by taking them out of the home, et cetera. So we brought this up at the Forms Committee and we were shot down very quickly by Judge Donovan, who said, well, hold on a minute, and very appropriately so, you may be violating the law in regards to the child needed care and who has a right to review that information, and whether or not there needs to be a tweak in the statute in order to place these questions on. I think that's some of the.
Also,
Go ahead.
also, my concern, well, I have a lot of concerns, but I know that Judge Moriarty is very big proponent of getting this information because he does a lot of mediation work now and he thinks it's important to know what the defendant's history is, and that is telling them some things, whether they've had foster care involvement or not. I appreciate that. I think more information is usually better. I think we do need to figure out what we're gonna do with this information, who gets it, but more importantly, who is gathering it, because the court services officers who are generating the PSI do not necessarily have access to the sync portion of Odyssey, and not everybody should. It's protected, and if we need to figure out whether these questions in and of themselves and who's asking them and how we're getting the answers to those questions, if it violates the statute, and there are civil and criminal penalties for doing so. And so I think throwing those questions on here without a lot more thought could be very problematic. Also, Spence brought up in our meeting, the PSI writer is not necessarily having a conversation with the defendant when they are creating the PSI, because if someone is presumptive prison, they are just pulling this information and they're not going, to the jail to look at it. And I will say, as someone who used to represent defendants, their version of what their criminal history is, which is, arguably when they're teenagers or adults, they were very bad historians. I'm thinking that adults who had some things happen to them when they're children are even worse historians. So I'm worried about the data not being up to your approval. Gathering reliable.
And to be clear, this would not go on the public portion of the PSI. It would go on the private, non-public page of the PSI.
That was my question when I read the question. Was this self-reported or is this, what is this? A lot of people wouldn't know what this means.
Yeah, so, and as far as while we're tabling things for this session, this probably is something that we want to continue to
Way to go, Jessica.
look at as we go through. We are getting some more input from some outside people kind of directly related to what Judge Donovan was saying. So they thought they would be able to get it to me by the end of the week.
Perfect.
But we would definitely have it by, if we had a November meeting, we can discuss this again. But essentially, we're wanting to gather this data so that we can potentially have sort of a proactive approach as far as compared to like a reactive approach. I know Judge Moriarty is wanting to get background as far as his mediation clients, so that can help him make an informed decision, but it also might help us from a policy standpoint be able to make legislative recommendations or even partner with another agency who's potentially more involved, but then we would be able to have that data directly related to our felony data. There is previous findings that, and I mean, this isn't an exhaustive list by any stretch, but essentially foster care placements, reduced adult defending, but it had to be a stable placement. Group homes were not considered a stable placement. As you'll see throughout here, the group home setting for foster care situations generally always results in an adverse outcome. Reunification with family had an adverse impact. Janshevsky, I believe is how you pronounce that, if it's the same as Mike Krzyzewski, the Duke basketball coach. And then youth who aged out of foster care were at lower risk for future offending. Font 2021 also found that reunified youth were at a higher risk of imprisonment. So I know there's often a push for reunification and to keep the children at home. Those are two direct studies that would say in certain situations, reunification actually had a negative impact on future criminal offending. Somerset Williams et al., youth with improved community life, strengths, talents and interests, educational strengths, spiritual, religious strengths, were a significantly lower risk of becoming justice involved while in child welfare. That gives us a lot of ideas of potentially what we could be doing or pushing kids to actually take part in activities, continuing to go to school, that sort of thing. Those children were at a much lower risk of potentially entering the adult system. Eastman et al. In 2024 found a relationship between residential instability and group homes to subsequent delinquency and court involvement. So there's another situation where group homes, if they're removed from their own family for abuse or neglect, going to a group home actually has a negative outcome. And then residential instability in general. By residential instability, as most know, when they're entering the foster care system, a lot of times it's not, they're just going to one foster home. You're often moving from foster home to foster home. When I was a police officer, we had lots of, calls that we were going to with foster care youth and parents, foster care parents, basically essentially not wanting that child anymore. And then they go to another foster care situation. You can imagine how difficult that is for a youth to potentially deal with when they're already dealing with potentially abuse and neglect at their own home. And they're dealing with that same issue in the foster care home as well. And Catulli also found specifically that African-American males and youth in group homes more likely to be juvenile justice involved. This one found that the age of placement was very important. Older youth were much more likely to offend, which does make sense logically, as well as with what the data says. If you're going into a foster care home as an infant, you're not going to probably remember what's going on. If you were adopted by your foster care placement as an infant, you're just not going to have all those same memories. Older youth, it's going to be much harder for them to deal with just from the sheer fact that they're older. They're going to remember what kind of home they were in. This is just the proposed questions that everybody has. Judge Sexton already went over. We talked about the protected data via the statute. And then sort of if we are able to collect this data, how will we be able to utilize it? I do think that this will be really revolutionary data if we're able to collect it. We could potentially, as far as sort of having a portrait of what a potential offender might have dealt with in the past and applying that to future offending, as well as potentially improving the foster care system in Kansas, which we all know has its own problems. So that's all Can
I ask, so this research, these findings, are they Kansas specific or are they
No.
national fund?
National.
And the reason I ask that is because a youth home is not is not one thing. I mean, there are lots of different models that are used with very different outcomes. So my question is, how are we distinguishing between possibly successful models and unsuccessful models? I mean, let's compare Missouri to Kansas, for example. Missouri has a system that is publicly operated and has very good success, actually. And so I'm just curious about whether Missouri is not as good as Missouri says it is, or, whether all of this is just kind of a national sweep, because, in certain cases, we have youth in the foster system or child need of care settings who are violent and and pose a risk to other youth in those settings. And so, we've kicked around the idea, what if we had some kind of residential youth facility that might be more structured and that might help these specific youth get whatever it is they need. And so, as we're looking at that, I just want to make sure, that I understand what you're saying here, because there needs to be a different kind of solution, and a group home could be defined in a number of different ways. I mean, a group home could have an average number of, 35 youth in it as opposed to maybe 5, for example, and other things like that. I mean, I've seen some that have worked really, really well in other countries I've lived in. And so I'm just kind of curious how we're defining that category.
No, that's a really good point. And each one of these is going to be probably having a slightly different definition as to what a group home is. You also brought up the point that those youth that are in the group home setting could very well be higher risk anyway. So that could just be sort of a weakness with some of the findings. If that's just an issue, like you're saying, if they're coming in with issues that they were already having, they were violent, potentially they need to be in a group home setting for safety reasons, they're probably going to be also more likely to end up in the adult system as well, regardless of placement. So those are fair points. None of these are Kansas. And the group home definition is going to vary slightly across these findings. That being said, as far as from a generalizability, then most of these are finding that the outcomes at the group home level are worse than being placed in actual traditional foster care.
Representative, I will tell you that you raised a great point. And if you gave, I can only speak for myself. If you can give me that home, I can help you fill it. I'd rather have kids in that home in a stable environment than skipping from house to house to house, a different house every night. Or more importantly, not going to a house and staying in the office. So that's a needed thing, but it is going to be high-risk individuals that are going to be in there. Because those are the individuals you're not going to be able to place in the foster care setting because of what you said. So it's an excellent point. Judge Glenda.
I'm just looking at this, wondering if this is the right way to get at this data, because presumably the sync system would have all of that data and could be cross-compared with PSI data and journal entry data that already exists. Like perhaps there should be some mechanism put in place where somebody studies them and cross-compares that information, but I'm not sure getting it as a self-report on a PSI is the best way of getting at this. Like it's a worthy comparison, but is this the right
And
place
it's
to do it?
possible, I'm not married to anything here as far as how we do it. If anybody has ideas on how to get this data, I'm all ears. I'm not gonna sit up here and argue this is the only way we can get this data. This data, if we collect it this way, if we have to go back and do that cross comparison, oh gosh, that'd be a really difficult task for us. It's gonna take us a whole lot of time. Does Sync have all of this data? Can we do a data request? Can we get it? Can we easily cross-reference what's going on? And these were just some of the basic questions that I was concerned with as to some of the research suggests, are you aging out? Are you in a foster care placement? Were you in a family placement as opposed to non-family placement? Those situations, just trying to get some sort of data that the criminal justice system doesn't really have access to. So if there's a better place to get it, I'm all ears. But we don't have it, and I do think that it would be really important to find, because I think it would allow us from a policy standpoint and also just a better picture of an offender, whether it's at sentencing or even during plea negotiations. You could say, here's the data that we have, this is the situation this individual was with so that we can draw some conclusions as to, you know, what their future outlook might be.
I think it's really good information. I'm just like, to me, this merits a bigger project where some, you know, outside group comes in and looks at it. Like, this is a legislative thing perhaps where we need a commission to look at sync data and compare it to criminal. I just think this is maybe the wrong context.
So we would have to have a commission.
I mean, I don't know. I don't know, but to me, it doesn't feel like this is a very good way to get at this information.
And Judge, I don't want to step on Judge Donovan's toes, but I was gonna echo essentially what Jessica is saying, and I want you to write that down. Jessica and Jessica agree.
It's a
But
momentous occasion.
it is. This is a great sociology question. It is an absolutely important public policy question. It is not sentencing commission responsibility and charge. And so for us to do that, I think we run afoul of what our charge is, which I'm constantly reminded of what our charge is on looking at the bed space and reducing the bed space and making recommendations for policy on that. Our charge is not to go back and identify children and predict outcomes based on what their social home life situation was to make more policy decisions. That is the job of 3 of the 4 people that are on this commission, I think. And I think we are stepping into a ground that is not our role with data that is incomplete. And I look at it from a practical standpoint as a prosecutor, and Jessica looks at it from a different standpoint. Like, this will only clog some of the system on what we try to accomplish and what I try to do in litigation on some of this issue will happen. And I wish Judge Hill was here to say that. So
The only thing that I would argue is if it's not in our area to look at is if we have this data and then we could be utilizing that once we collect it and analyze it, and then we're using that data at sentencing, since it'll be in the PSI, and it becomes a factor as to whether or not someone is potentially getting probation as opposed to prison, which would have a reduction in prison beds down the road. Also, you would be potentially looking at reoffending or recidivism. If we were to reduce that, it would also reduce prison beds. That would be my
And
only.
the argument to that, John, is there's also already departure factors that defense counsel can utilize on this area. And instead, you're turning the PSI into its own mitigating without looking at maybe the other side of the picture on those types of issues. So you're putting a departure factor into a finding that's not in the sentencing grid as we see it now. Defense counsel can file these motions, can argue these issues, can litigate them under our current departure factors now. I agree with you on that. But now you're making it a fact in the PSI that the court has to consider. Like, there's no guidelines for that. And then am I, as the prosecutor, then supposed to go out and see if this is true or not, or be able to account for other situations that might lead to what the result was? I mean, I feel like this is, again, it's a social science issue that I don't feel is part of our statistical responsibilities under the Sentencing Commission. And I don't feel like this is the proper place for it. But for different reasons than Jessica probably.
I was gonna say, I don't actually agree with all of that.
Judge Donovan.
I was gonna say, if we do these questions at some point, we need to look into it more. You should have the home, whether you're in a group home or not on there, because obviously that's statistically, and that's not part of our questions now.
Pat,
Well, perhaps irrelevant, but I will say, when I was
you could try to do a buffer thing.
I'm totally off the grid. When I was working in the human trafficking area, the police in Wichita could absolutely tell me where, with the kids in foster care, whether they were being placed in a good one or a bad one, that we would see more activity or not. The police could absolutely identify, and they were very right. So I think there's a lot to be said about DCF kind of keeping an eye on what these foster homes are are able to accomplish and who, because of this, what the police always said is half of them just want the money. Just send me the money. I don't care what the kid does. And then the other half are actually trying to fulfill the role we hope for. So, but the police had it nailed. And, anyway, I do think it's a whole area. Foster care is an area that we haven't been great on in Kansas. We haven't done a great job. And
Ed's sitting down there writing every word you said about please send me. You're gonna get quoted. John, anything else?
This is kind of just the beginning of a conversation that I think we do not need to, like, hey, we don't need to have a decision today.
Right.
I will put the plug in. I do desperately want to get access to this data because I do think that it would be incredibly interesting. It's going to paint a portrait of what an offender in Kansas looks like. And since we have all that offender data, getting a little bit more background on what those offenders experienced as children. We don't collect juvenile justice data. So this is just one more potential risk factor that we would really like to have. It would also be sort of separating us apart from other sentencing commissions or even criminal justice agencies nationally, as being able to have access to that level of data. So if this isn't the way we want to collect it, I'm fine with that. We can think about other ways. But if you do come up with a way, please shoot an email or something to me somehow, because I do think that this is really worth investigating and gathering this data. And I think it can be really important down the road for recidivism purposes.
So you're receiving other information that you don't have yet that you thought would get to you at the end of this week. So
That really is more into the legal statutory as whether it is what we would need to do to potentially get this data. It's completely removed from or do we want to collect this data? I say we definitely want to collect it somehow. Whether we collect it on the PSI, that's a completely different situation. So the data that I'm going to be getting, or the answer that I was going to be getting, is more in reference to Judge Donovan's concern about the legality of getting the data generally, not do we want to even utilize the PSI for that data.
So we've started the discussion today. So let's table this to the next meeting. We are well represented by the legislative branch of our government here. I'd be curious as to give them time to think about it with the information we've put forth today. I very much appreciate everybody's position here. This was good decisions made. And let's just table this. I don't want to drop the discussion yet. So let's table it till next time.
Sounds fine with me.
And of course, the main thing we need to keep in mind is that when we tweak these forms, I always have to lean back to Trish. She's a magician because how many angels can dance in the head of a pin, or how much can you fit on an 8x11 piece of paper? That's her task, and she does very well. All right, so anything else in regards to the 1 o'clock? Shall we move on to the 1:30?
That's it.
Scott? No.
Scott, is there going to be a PowerPoint for this?
Yeah.
Okay.
Nate?